So welcome to the Centre for Irish Towns and this series of talks called Talking Towns. And today the theme is on the main street or the high street. And it's we're running it as part of the UCD Centre for Irish Towns, a research centre at UCD, and the Nations of Towns, an initiative with our Scottish partners. So we're going to have a little bit of cross-border discussion and on towns in different places. I'm going to ask everybody to mute themselves until you're asked to unmute, just in case, you know, you're boiling the kettle or anything over lunch. I'm going to just have a little brief reflection on our main streets, and then I'm going to turn to our really great panel today to offer ideas on a better future for these incredible assets, I call it, but threatened heritage, particularly in Ireland. I'm Miriam Fitzpatrick, and I lecture in urban design at UCD, and I'm part of the Centre for Irish Towns. And I'm here joined with Orla Murphy, who has set that up. So in the context of my research, which really is about urban open space, I just thought I'd have a little bit of reflection, perhaps a little bit of outrage on behalf of towns. And that is that really towns are an incredible exemplar of street-based urbanism, in a way that we can almost never replicate in their layout and their continuous units, often terraces, with a mix of uses and a mix of users, and that they always seem to flex and respond to the topography of their place or to any specifics of Celtic ruins or rivers, bridges, etc. They're incredible exemplars of urban design. And yet we're allowing a lot of them to languish. I often describe these kind of, they're like people gathered around a table, let's say. Usually their doors, their windows face each other as a conversation, in a way that often doesn't happen nowadays. And from that, we have created an incredible lexicon, particularly, I think, across all of Ireland and Scotland, in this way that they are set up as market exchange first, and secondly, as social spaces. So then we get these often squares, straights, crosses, crisscrosses, radial sometimes, a dumbbell type of layout, often a trumpet or a cigar-shaped configurations. But most, if I'm allowed to say this, probably since the 70s, they've fallen into decline. And often there's this, I'm going to say, just neglect, a neglect of intelligence often in how to regenerate them, and also a neglect in terms of grabbing the opportunities of retail on the edge of town that really, town by town, sucks them up their life. And then also the convenience of that shopping, but also of your house with its car on the edge of town, which itself also creates a hollowing out, a turning inside out of these towns. So that's probably, I'll have one more thing to say, that I am from Mayo, and a wonderful journalist John Healy wrote in 1967, "No one shouted stop." And he's writing about Charlestown and County Mayo, which he saw over the long 60s, was just allowed to fall into decline because of politics. And so, funny enough, it's around the same time Henri Lefebvre is writing about cities and talking about the incredible dynamics that shape cities. So I guess I'm turning to my range of speakers today to bring their thoughts on what that dynamic is that runs through towns, in order that we might tap into their intelligence about a way to turn them around today. So we're lucky that we're going to have 3 speakers today. I'm afraid Giulia Vallone can't join us. She's currently in Scotland on a field trip. So first we have Iain Scott and Mark Bingham is going to follow, and they're both from Edinburgh University, and they're going to talk on transforming Scottish towns, reflections on 3 years of studios that they have been running in the last while. So they will lead, and then we'll be followed by Tara Buckley. Tara is a long friend of this Group and is a Director General of RGDATA, which stands for Retail, Grocery, Dairy and Allied Trades Association, and the dynamic link between really small town owner businesses and their lifeline in towns. So I will now turn, I think it's Iain, you're going to lead, is that right? And just to say, Iain is an architect and is teaching at Edinburgh School of Landscape Architecture and has been a visiting professor in China. And he has been doing some research on older people and the built environment. And he's going to talk to us about rethinking towns. So thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. And hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here. We were going to do this a wee while back, but we had to cancel at short notice. So it's nice to have the opportunity again. Thank you. Mark and I were kind of going to do this as a bit of a conversation. I will lead on the first part and Mark will lead on the second, but we'll invite, thoughts from one another as we go. Yes, we're both architects and friends, and we've worked together for a very long time, and we were students together in the 1980s. We teach in ESALA in the master's principally, but also sometimes at undergraduate level in fourth year, which one of the projects on Dalkeith that we'll show you here last year was with fourth year. Our studios tend to be linked to our research, and that operates in various forms around housing, principally, and older people and their relationship to the city. So we've been kind of running Towns studios for about 6 or 7 years now, and we'd like to just talk about sort of 4 of those projects, actually in a range of different places over the course of those years, and some of the thoughts that have come up, the kind of whys of why we worked there. Some of the issues that were place specific that might chime with certain people in their own towns, and then what we considered to be some project outcomes that we thought were quite positive. So next slide, yeah. So we started off because we'd been looking at the age-friendly city. We'd been working in towns, we'd been Manchester and London and so on. And we were going to go to Japan, when we ended up going to Tuscany because Italy is the second oldest population in the world. And we became interested in Tuscan towns. We were thinking about the city in the first instance, but then we thought, well, the towns are more interesting because they have a higher concentration of older people. The Tuscan town is, you'll all be aware of it, really, as a kind of sort of beautiful, often forgotten piece of urbanism in the landscape. I think it's an issue for Italian history and heritage. Is how they're not just preserved, but how they're seen as sort of active places of living going forward. Some of the more beautiful ones, like let's say Certaldo or Montefiorale, exist really as a form of Disneyfied sort of place, a preserved wonderland, really, for the sole purpose of tourism and light commercial use. So that's problematic. Those ones have really been left behind. There are others like Figlini Valdarno, which you can see here on the middle left, where the old town becomes embedded in a sort of post-war expanded urban fabric, and the dispersal of activities, and housing onto the periphery, with the walled town really kind of, again, sort of forgotten and left behind. Public transport tends to be non-existent at a local level. Obviously, there's a decent rail network nationally, but it's non-existent at a local level. And that means that older people often have to rely on family members to be able to just carry out the simple activities of daily life. As I say, many of them are served by rail links. There's really no sense of arrival or celebration of entry, when you arrive at most of these towns. And another problem is obviously, whilst most of them are surrounded by landscape, they have no active relationship with that landscape. it's sort of private vineyards, or some of them owned by multinationals and so on. And there's a distinct lack of green space within the centre of the town. So those are really sort of broadly the issues, and I think lots of them will chime with towns in Scottish and Irish contexts. We're showing you here one project which you can see in the slides along the bottom and on the right hand side. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But some nice outcomes for us that we thought were really positive, I would say, were programs and ideas that were really related and rooted in the historic places that we were studying. So related to maybe historic functions or some form of community raison d'etre. In a small town such as Montelupo, which had previously been the centre of ceramic production in Tuscany, we had a project for a ceramic school, which would work for different age groups and supported by student accommodation, which was about thinking about bringing young people back to kind of live in the town. Obviously, Tuscany being a place of walls, we did get a lot of inhabited wall projects, which many of you who know architects, we sort of love inhabited wall projects. But it was about reimagining the wall as rather than something which is a barrier, sort of repurposing that as a place of connection. Walls with spaces in them, and fragmented walls. This is interesting. I'm thinking about sort of reconfiguring the edge of the town, which is something that we did in Dalkeith as well, and thinking more about the edge of the town and its relationship to its landscape. But Mark's going to talk about that shortly. So inhabited wall projects, we had a lot of transportation projects which tried to generate a sense of occasion upon arrival, with clear walkable links to the town centre. And then supplementary programs which increased density and intensity, like hotels and intergenerational housing to bring back young families, and student accommodation, as I say, for the ceramic school. So the project that you're seeing here was a sort of reimagining of Montelupo's train station as a place of civic arrival, densification, intensification, and some commercial program, but also a hotel and student accommodation that was related to a ceramic school. So it was really, we thought, sort of interesting on the level that it was almost trying to invent a new kind of urban typology for towns, which considers the transport arrival and the transport hub as a place of kind of regrowth and recentering. We also had a lot of green walkable neighbourhoods with intergenerational housing to bring vigour back to the city centre, to the town centre. So that was the first one that we did in Italy, and then we decided that we were going to come back to Scotland and run a studio in a Scottish context to test how those ideas and those issues either existed or didn't exist within our own national context. But maybe I should just invite Mark in to say, if Mark, do you have anything that you would add to say about what we did in Tuscany?
I think the interesting thing about, I suppose Tuscany is that fragmentation, which I think we'd probably all recognise in relation to what's happened in urbanism. As we are a society who are now drawn, I suppose, driven by models for everything, whether it be economic models, whether it be sustainability models, whether it be, there's almost a solution waiting in everyone's back pocket to consider a way of doing something. And I think when you look at the Tuscan villages and the time it took for them to develop, and the relationship with a finite area of land, but also the civic and the urban functions being finitely contained within a walled environment. That was interesting. And I think the other aspect was the relationship of village to village. There were almost one day's horse ride between each location. So I suppose the idea in relation to considering the connections and the transportation was more broadly about the idea that as that idea of community identity is diminished within the fabric of these towns and the connections have become longer, so railway stations which would take you predominantly into Florence and elsewhere, have really allow us or demand that we actually start to reconsider the type of building typologies which are going to be future-proof these places going forward.
Yeah, thanks. So as I say, then we moved on to Falkirk. And I think Falkirk, I would say, is a sort of classic case of a town with many of the sort of issues that we recognise, today as being central to towns, of a beautiful high street, which you can see in the left-hand image of a sort of collage done by a student trying to kind of reimagine it as a place of civic function, community, and well-being, really. But it's got a dead high street. It's got enormous retail vacancy. It's overstretched itself in terms of retail. It's got two gigantic retail malls, which are both just big white elephants, really, on the high street. They're sitting mostly empty. There's a little bit of sort of, charity shop use and so on, but you could buy them for £1 if you wanted to, and they're enormous sites. So the high street's dead. No one lives there. There's no housing at all. Come 5 o'clock, especially when it gets dark, I think it becomes a place that you don't really feel very safe. I think particularly if you're younger or if you're female, it's a place that doesn't feel entirely safe. Again, post-war 20th century urban planning policies have dispersed all of those sort of functions of local government and so on that used to exist within the centre. There are no nurseries there or doctors' surgeries and so on. So it really is massively affected by the retail shift. But as I say, it's a place where no one lives, really. So what else? Yeah, it also has a road network, and this is an example of classic sort of early 20th century or mid 20th century urban planning. They put a ring road in, really, so around the outside, so you can sort of move around the outside very easily and quickly, but you can't. It's very, very difficult to actually move through the town and through the centre. And what the ring road does is it takes all the energy away from the centre. So some of our projects that our students done, one of the first things that they looked at was reconfiguring not just the vehicular transport, but more generally just ways of getting around and trying to think about bringing energy back to the centre. Our good project outcomes here, I would say, were innovative mixed-use programmes, usually incorporating housing and community functions. We had lots of projects. You can see on the big model here, we had students working together in groups of 3 or 4 to create, we don't really like the term master plan, but a kind of shared sort of spatial strategy, really, that individual projects could then sit within. So they often included housing of different tenure. We had a lot of intergenerational housing. We had housing for older people. We had care homes. So the idea of bringing older people and in some instances, the oldest people back to live in the high street, really within what we see as being the ideal, the perfect 20-minute neighbourhood, really. It's about a mile long, Falkirk High Street. It takes you about 20 minutes to walk from one end to the other. We had markets, nurseries, community education facilities, sort of cooperative community retail projects, and theatres and workshops, often in those little industrial spaces that sit in behind. The project that you see down the bottom was, we thought, a great one. We thought it was really interesting because it incorporated housing. It had a market at ground floor level. You see the plan in this bottom right-hand image. So I should say it created a courtyard. It was a civic building that brought some of the more public functions of the local government, or the town hall kind of drop in and things like that, back to the very centre of the high street with a kind of civic architecture. And a courtyard with a ground floor open urban market that opened out into the street and into the courtyard, and housing above. And also the building which is placed in the very centre is the council debating chamber, which was also within the courtyard. So it was a really interesting sort of test of bringing, and densifying all those kind of functions of community and civic and people living and so on, just as they used to be, really, in older towns, which you can see in the top left-hand image of Falkirk in days gone by. Really, the sort of intensity of that form of urbanism, and all of those little courtyards and spaces in that town image would have been mixed use, with people actually living there. Another one of the issues with Falkirk that you can see in the bottom left-hand image is the obliteration of sort of wider parts of the urban network through retail parks and so on. But we were focusing on the high street. So yeah, I think higher densities were key as well. But I think those were our outcomes.
Yeah, I think is something which then I think evolved from looking at Falkirk into Dalkeith was the idea that Falkirk, which had been, in some senses, a very diverse high street network of different spatial environments along its length. It's roughly a mile long. So you had different locations for different urban functions, some which were markets, some which would be related more to religious and civic activities, some which would consequently relate to kind of retail, some which would relate to some industrial uses as well. So along the length of the high street, you had effectively all the aspects of the community's activity, but consequently all the members of the community participating within that environment in and around what we superficially call daily life. But as it evolved over time and as it fragmented, it became more monocultural, and it started to connect itself to a larger model of retail. So the individual retailers moved out, the conglomerates and the bigger groups moved in. When the consequence of their model then changed, I suppose, within the digital era, and it's still changing to this day, we ended up with this process of urban voidance where the retailers had moved in, the spaces above the shops had become derelict or used for storage. There was an anchoring for the high street in and around retail, but as a consequence, as soon as that moved away, we found that the whole programming of Falkirk, and indeed a lot of towns of this type of nature in Scotland, including the one we're going to talk about now, Dalkeith, had been really had become kind of quite problematic in terms of the nature of the types of activities that would occur on the high streets in terms of just people's levels of security. So by solution, the idea of resettling that, re-urbanising that, repopulating that as a place for people to live was probably seemed like a natural starting point, both in Falkirk and in Dalkeith to a certain extent.
I would say, though, I would just say that the thing is with Falkirk, I think we've very much focused on the centre and on the high street.
Yeah.
And then, as you'll say, talk about with Dalkeith, we got more interested in the edge of the town and its relationship with that landscape and how that might be reimagined in a sort of 21st century context, to do with obviously community food production or well-being and other things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we moved to kind of Dalkeith, Dalkeith's quite a resolved town in the sense that it doesn't have the same type of urban voidance and problem spaces and I suppose derelict buildings you would find in kind of Falkirk. It still has a very resolved kind of urban structure. It still has some quite significant civic buildings along its length in terms of there's churches and community buildings, etc. But what it didn't have, or what had changed, was it was a town which was built up and adjacent to the Duke of Buccleuch's estate. And so the people had a relationship with the estate and worked the land kind of over time. At the peak of its kind of productivity, it was the largest grain market in the east coast of Scotland. So it was a point of accumulating all of the grain from the various farms, etc., to be sold and then logistically moved from Dalkeith across the rest of the rest of the UK. So it had this kind of quite resolved landscape. It was both an agricultural landscape, but also a landscape used by the gentry who would come, north, south, east, and west to use the land. And it had a wall around that landscape adjacent to the town. So there was gates at one end of the town which takes you into the landscape, but otherwise it was disconnected from the people of the town. So the challenge we looked for students, and this was through a kind of a broader wellbeing narrative, was to send them into the landscape, to find locations and to identify atmospheres within the landscape setting, which I suppose in some sense just appeal to them, and then to try and capture that or accentuate that atmosphere or found atmosphere in a natural setting within a built structure. So the built structure would become a way of attenuating that atmosphere experience. And so the one shown on this page, there's a beautiful river also in Dalkeith. So in the River Esk, the student wanted to build this sounding structure, which reduced the light but encapsulated the noise and the sound of the river and of the Esk.
I think
yeah,
you've locked up.
All right, can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you, Mark. I think Miriam's. Oh, you froze for a minute there, Miriam.
All right.
You're back. You're back.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was your internet.
No.
Are you near the end?
Well, just give me a couple of minutes, and I'll quickly just rush through. I want to, so in some senses, I think we started looking more broadly at, or trying to encourage students to look broadly and slightly more in a more abstract, personal way into the landscape. What can we relearn? Because there's, as we said at the beginning, there's so many different factors that are influencing the change to daily life, not just the physical structures, but all aspects of human behaviour. Our grandfathers worked for 14 hours a day, our fathers and mothers for 9. Our children may work 3 times a week for 4 hours a day. So there's dramatic changes, which perhaps mean that we have to recalibrate how we relate and how we integrate with the landscape environment. And that's what we tried to do in Dalkeith. Was to try and get people to start to think about the qualities of not just at a recreational level, but something which would be fundamentally more meaningful to people's well-being. Bring that.
I'm going to end it there, if that's not impolite, to get
you.
Tara's ideas.
Thank you.
Really interesting, and I'd be really curious, but we'll deal with it later, how you then went on to sell this to the 2 different towns. But Tara, would it be okay if we bring that to an end, as it were? Is that a logical place? Tara. Okay, so I will introduce, if I'm still live, it feels like my internet's coming and going, but
you are.
Okay. Tara is with RGDATA, as I already introduced. It represents family-owned businesses in the town since about 70 years, but Tara is really passionate about town, so I'm going to just let her go from here. So thank you, Tara.
Thanks very much, Miriam. Sorry, is everybody seeing my screen now? Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So just to quickly introduce myself, I'm the Director General of RGDATA. We represent about 3,500 shops all around Ireland in towns, villages and urban areas and city centres. My members operate convenience grocery stores, and where an awful lot of them are right in the town centre. RGDATA recognised, as both Iain and Mark have pointed out, the importance of good planning, the importance of concentrating on ensuring your town centre is vibrant, and the role that planning plays in that. We recognised that a long time ago, so I've ended up becoming a sort of expert on planning and urban design as a matter of default, because it's been so important to my members. We were big campaigners for the retail planning guidelines, because we recognise that if you allow out of town, edge of town, or retail in inappropriate places, the dramatic impact it can have on the core of the town, on the footfall, on the vibrancy. So we would have been big advocates for the retail planning guidelines. We would continually look at them and make sure they're implemented. So I'm probably a bit of a flea on the back of the large elephant, which is the big march of the predatory multiples who've arrived in Ireland in the last 20 years and want to build not in our town centres, but out on greenfield sites with their big car parks. They're like Vera Lynn, they like to be alone. We want you to come and shop with us, but don't go anywhere else. We like people who want to come in, shop around, visit lots of shops, good competition, good vibrancy, good energy. That's what we like in the independent grocery sector. We're not afraid of competition. We're up for it, but we think that you have to be very careful about the way you plan and deliver so that you create that vibrancy and create that competition. We got very involved with the Heritage Council and the wonderful Alison Harvey in the Collaborative Town Centre Health Check programme. And that was born out of a lot of frustration from watching what was happening in Irish towns and realising that we had no data, we had no way of bringing communities together who were really anxious to work on their towns and make them more vibrant, but didn't know where to start. We didn't know how to map our towns. We had no footfall counters. So to be honest with you, that program, which was a pilot program and looked at over 16 towns, created an amazing database. It created an amazing movement and bringing together of people in small towns all over Ireland to come together and really have a good look at their town and look at the opportunities, the challenges, and what could be done to make their towns better. And what I loved about that program was it was from the bottom up. It brought everyone together and made them start looking at their town. So it wasn't experts coming in and looking at a town, it was the actual townspeople themselves. And actually, Iain and Mark have touched on this, of the involvement of students. You know, that program, and Miriam was involved in the program too. That program, we linked up with UCD students, other students from other universities who are studying planning or architecture or marketing. And they did a lot of the research and surveys. And it was fantastic to get young people who lived in the towns themselves or were living in the town because they were attending university there, coming in with fresh eyes to look at the town, look at, you know, what was there now, what its potential was, what people liked about it, what they didn't like about it. So I'm a really very interested in that approach, that collaborative approach that brings the actual townspeople and the people who live in the town together with the experts to try and map out a future plan for vibrancy. The other thing, I suppose, because I represent food retailers and convenience retailers, it's been clear from research carried out by Professor Kevin Layden over in UCG and many other academics that having a local food shop is a hugely important part of a vibrant town or a vibrant village or a vibrant urban area. And, you know, I think that's really important because I've watched from the coalface what my members are doing in their towns and villages. I suppose too, the other area that's been touched on here is about the future of retail and how possibly in the past we relied on retail to be the core of a vibrant town, and that most definitely has changed. But the future of food and convenience retail is not as dramatically changed as maybe other types of retail, with the threat of online and people migrating to only online. People still want to go to physical bricks and mortar food and convenience stores. So we have a role still, we're still standing, we're still in the town centres. We may be one of the last few, you know, vibrant businesses that are still running, but we're there and we are very engaged in investing in our towns and making them successful for everyone in the town. So we recognise that this is more about, it's much more about retail than retail, but retail, convenience and food retail has a hugely important part to play. I just want to introduce you to some of the people I represent, because these are the people that all of the experts like yourselves, like planners, like landscape architects, like urban designers, like our local authorities, these are the people you need to tap into and support. Up there on the top right is Pádraig Broderick, who runs a spar in Croom, which is a tiny village in County Limerick. Pádraig has just invested over 1 million in his store, making it a state-of-the-art small supermarket in a small town. Pádraig is also one of the key people behind Croom Development Association. And it's like a group of local business people who got together and said, if we want our town to work, if we want our town to be vibrant and to be an attractive place to live, we have to come together and do things to make it great. And, you know, the interesting thing is, along with Porrick investing in his store, they got involved with, they have a beautiful park right in the town centre, and they worked building a fantastic community resource in that. It's a place people can meet, come together, but they can also walk around and use the beautiful facilities of the town park. It's a gathering space. They've also developed a local hub. But what I'm saying here is that this is a businessman who's trying to run a business, employ people, invest in it, but is also hugely invested in making his town, his village, a wonderful place for the people that live there. Down on the bottom left there is Finbar Filan, who's a member of ours over in Sligo. And Finbar has been a leading light in the local bid in Sligo and gives huge amount of his time to trying to ensure that Sligo has regenerated the town centre in a way that to suit everyone in the town. So really what I'm saying is that these are people who are running businesses, employing people, but also hugely invested in their town centres. On this slide, I have John Field is up in the top right-hand corner. John Field is a wonderful fresh food retailer, one of the best in this country. He runs a supermarket called Fields in Skibbereen, and they're bakers. They've run a long bakery that provides all of West Cork with its bread. John was sitting in Skibbereen wondering, what are we going to do to make our town better? And he came up with the idea of the Ludgate Hub, which was Ireland's first digital hub. And he got the fastest broadband. And John did that by knocking heads together he saw who came to his town, who were the holiday makers, who were the influencers, how could he get them involved, bring them in and make them all work together. And he gave the building that was his original bakery, which is right in the town centre, and he moved the bakery out to the edge of the town, and he gave the building over, and he had Anne O'Leary from Vodafone, because she's a local, but she also has a holiday home down there. She came from West Cork. He got her involved because he wanted the fastest broadband. He got filmmakers like David Putnam and people like that, business people who visited and business people who lived there. He brought them all together, and now Skibbereen is a changed town, and it's led the way in terms of the digital revolution. So the point I'm trying to make to you all is that these are not dusty little businesses run by little people who are small-minded and thinking only of what they're going to earn in their shop. These are people who really believe that their towns should be a great place to live, that their main streets should be a fantastic place for people to come into and visit. They should be thriving and vibrant. There should be competitors. There should be other little bakers. There should be coffee shops. There should be drapers. There should be other types of shops. And they know that people will come. If you have a vibrant town centre, people will come in and support it. And, Skibbereen is seeing, COVID has actually proven to towns like Skibbereen that there's a whole generation of young people that are happy to live in a rural town where there's a vibrant community, a vibrant town, and a digital hub where they can go in and do their work with the fastest broadband that you can get. So it's revitalized the whole town. Food, so just to, I've probably said it already, but food shops are so important as part of this looking at how our towns and villages and our main streets survive. So that's why it's so important that we keep them there, because they are economic, social and community hubs. They generate that essential daily footfall, so the other shops around them can also survive, because people are coming in every day to do a bit of shopping in the local grocer, to do a bit of dealing with their bills, to do a bit of topping up their mobile phones. Whatever they have to do, they can do it in my member's shop. They're also investing. These people are investing every 3 to 5 years in their businesses. This is not, we have the most fantastic convenience grocery stores. We beat everyone else hands down. They come from all over Europe. They come from America to look at convenience and grocery, small supermarkets in Ireland, in small rural towns and villages, where we are seeing the type of investment that Porrick is making, every 2 to 5 years, they are making that investment. The sort of things they're investing now are whole new sustainable solar energy, sustainable fridges, things like that. They're constantly trying to make sure they're at the top of their game and that they are the best fresh food retailers and convenience grocers in the world. They are significant employers. My members in general running independent supermarkets would employ 100 people, 120 people. You can take it that the discount supermarket on the edge of the town probably employs 15 people. So they are significant employers in their towns, and they are working hard to make sure those people have those jobs and stay in those jobs. They are the best supporters of the local community. They live in the town. Their elderly parents live in the town and need access to healthcare. Their children live in the town and need access to education. They want the town to have the type of services and provision and arts and culture and, you know, activities and sports. They want them to have all of those things so that the town is vibrant and a great place to live. And they also sponsor and support their local different activities. You know, the big boys, the big multiples can tell you how wonderful they are about supporting the GAA or supporting this or that. My members collectively put in 100 times more into their local community than any of the big predatory multiples ever do. And unfortunately, because they're all doing it individually, they can't collectively tell you what they're doing. But I can tell you that they're worth 3.6 billion annually to the national economy, and they're worth hundreds of millions in sponsorship to every type of local club and local community enterprise, tidy towns, active retirement groups, children's groups. They are involved and they're very actively supporting in those things. They're also accessible to everyone. Miriam asked us to, you know, to look at what we think is working. We think that genuinely collaborative initiatives are working. So the Collaborative Town Centre Health Check Programme to us gave us an example of how something like that could really start the ball rolling in a town by bringing people together to really interrogate and analyse their town, and also start collecting that missing data that we've never collected in Ireland. I obviously think that we have fantastic planners, architects, landscape architects, urban designers, young planning and architectural students and urban design students and other students. And what I would love is that how we link them with the entrepreneurs, with the people who are living in the towns and working in the towns. Because if we have that, if we all work in our silos, we're not going to deliver the type of regeneration and vitality that we want to do, that we all want to do. I think that I'm very disappointed in terms of how the Collaborative Town Centre Health Check Programme has been sort of left in the sidelines. I really wished it was turned into a national programme and funded as a national programme. And we have a national town centre first structure, but I'm disappointed in how that's been pushed out and run. I wanted it to be more along the lines of what they did in Scotland and make it a distinct entity on its own, and that people fed into it. So the local authorities fed into it. So all of the experts and everything fed into it, and the local communities fed into it. And it was the guiding hand that would help us all to try and progress in our individual towns. When we have collaboration across government departments and collaboration across different universities and towns, and we see great success. When we work in our silos, we don't. And I really believe in the bottom-up approach. I think it's something we haven't quite mastered, but if we, and people I'd be recommending to you at the end of this are people I believe really engage in this. So it's about community building. It's about getting the local people involved in their area and getting them engaged in the whole process of making the area great again. So my frustrations are, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? Scotland's Towns Partnership is a fantastic initiative. I believe it showed us the way we should go and why we sit back here. It's an Irish thing, I think, but we start going back to try and start from scratch and plan a new thing and make something new, when we could have just taken a good idea and built on it and turned it into a fantastic entity here. I think that we have a lot of people focused on this area, but we're not working and bringing them all together. So I think that's what that body, that national body, could have done, that the people working in all these spaces, something that would bring them all together so that we're all focused and working together. So then I look at what's actually happening on the ground, and the feedback I would be getting from, retailers in different areas. So we're looking at, we've a town centre first policy. We're promoting, we're doing different pilot projects. But on the other hand, then the engineers are over remastering the pedestrianisation or the cycle routes, and they haven't even asked the local businesses what they think. They haven't come near them until they've a plan. And then it looks like we're against everything because we realise that our delivery trucks can't get in, our customers in wheelchairs or our customers with prams can't get in, our customers who need to be able to get close enough that they can bring their shopping back out to the car, can't get anywhere near the store. So we have to think all of these things through. We are absolutely in favour of walkable, vibrant, people coming by bicycle, people coming by different methods of transport. So it's not that we're against pedestrianisation or things, but we need it to be done in a way that brings everyone along and keeps the town centre accessible and viable for everyone. The other thing, I suppose, my frustration is the lack of data. We just don't collect the data we should. We're supposed to collect footfall. We're supposed to look at things. We don't do it. We stick our finger in the air, or we let developers stick their finger in the air and tell us what it's going to be like. And we never measure or look at it. And we never go back then and see, did it do what it said it was supposed to do? We don't have any statistics or data. So that's a huge frustration. To pose a challenge to planners and architects, I mean,
so
obviously,
we'll say just another minute or two,
okay.
Tara.
Well,
no,
then,
it's
look,
terrible to cut you short here.
So that's,
Fantastic.
I think that I've probably told you what I really would like you to do, which is to be collaborative and working together, and to really look at this whole area of the data and then the projection of where we're going. So then Miriam asked me to recommend a book, but instead I've actually, because my student children here will never read a book anyway, so I'm recommending two influences that I believe are speaking a huge amount of sense in this area. Cormac Russell, who calls himself a social explorer, and his TED talk is about sustainable community development and how you focus on what's strong and you bring the community with you. And Stacey Mitchell, who is from the Institute of Self-Reliance in the States, and she is campaigning against the predatory multiples and Amazon, Walmart, and how they are destroying small towns in the States and what needs to be done to sort that out. So they're my two recommendations. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Tara. I couldn't cut you short because you are Ireland's national asset in this, in making towns work. And I can imagine how you must be pulling your hair out at the town centre first policy, which I don't mind saying personally, I think is just lackluster. I don't know what happens when you get a group like that together, but it is wonderful to hear your thoughts on business and people making things happen there on the ground. So I'm afraid we've left about a few minutes and there have been some questions raised, but I thought I might just ask if this would be an okay thing to say, maybe Iain, if you wouldn't mind, or Mark, to respond to Tara's position, because you may not have met before, but she really knows what's going on and has described how when you allow people the latitude to do things well in their own place, it happens. But we have put so many barriers in the way, Tara. Everything that you could do to prevent towns regenerating almost put in place, isn't that right? So Iain and Mark, just your thoughts on, from a Scottish perspective, your thoughts on how we could help Tara's initiative more, maybe.
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of difference, between what you're describing. Even though we maybe have the Scottish Towns Partnership, we've got a lot of policy kind of elements. Scotland's full of policy, but in actual fact, it comes down to, I think, some of the individuals you mentioned kind of there who actually are prepared on an entrepreneurial level to drive these types of things forward and to have that kind of local kind of buy-in. And I think that's something, and certainly a Scottish context, has massively changed since the financial crisis in 2008. Prior to that point, we had some quite large financial institutions in Scotland who would underpin investment and development towards, real estate and other industries. That's very, very sadly now diminished dramatically. So the type of progressive thinking and supporting investment is something which now, in a Scottish context, we're very, very reliant upon external financial institutions. So a lot of those kind of entrepreneurs have had to kind of pivot into different areas because of the nature and the lack of opportunity. So policy is one thing, but personality is another. And I think the inherent focus and support at a financial level to make things happen is vitally important.
Yeah, I would just support that. And I recall a conversation with Phil Prentice of Scotland's Towns Partnership, who many of you will know. And I said to him, what's the most important thing, Phil, in town regeneration? He said it was leadership. He said it was the right people in the right places, inspiring others and so on. And you could see that really clearly, not just from Tara's presentation, the way you talked yourself, but from the people that you highlighted and what they're doing in their own local communities. And the other thing that Phil said to me was that, there's no one fix for any of our towns because they're all so different, So whether, as you say, Miriam, earlier, whether it's a rural town or you might be in a coastal town, you might be in an embedded urban town, the issues and problems are very, very different depending on your situation. So there's no one size fits all solution. And it needs to be place specific and it needs to be led by the right people. So maybe the question is just about how do we create more leaders, and more sort of vibrant and encouraging individuals? How do we create that environment where younger people can flourish and come through and take on those roles?
I just wanted to ask Orla, you put a question in the, and thank you also Shane and Nessa for asking questions. I don't think we'll get time, will we? To address those just in a few minutes. And I wish we now had another hour because having you in the room would be fantastic to pick your brains. Tara, anything you'd like to add in return or any question for Iain and Mark? And then
No, just to follow on from their point. I'm hoping that what UCD is doing is producing some of those future leaders. But I suppose what we need to understand too is how we can provide the supports that help them with this sort of the community building end of things. I think that they can be brilliant at being architects or planners, but I think the area that we need to probably give more support is how they can become sort of community builders.
And we need more like you in every town. So it's been wonderful.
Just one thing on Tara's point there is that, in actual fact, a lot of the urban structures we look at and admire actually existed before there were planners and architects, and we were far more reliant upon master builders and people who were actually involved in the full cycle of the process. And so perhaps that's an initiative we need to consider more broadly.
Yeah. I'm really sorry, and I know it's very discourteous to those who've asked questions not to answer them, but because we're against the hour and because I have to go to another one too at 2, would it be all right to close the conversation and to just say we should do this again? And I'll give you a little bit more time because it's absolutely fantastic. And thank you for sharing your thoughts, to have students studying alternatives, looking at comparative analysis, and Tara bringing your passion and your work with people on the ground is it's wonderful. So give me some hope. I hope to the rest of our team here. I'm going to just have to close it there, and really sorry we didn't get to answer various questions, but maybe we might through emails follow up. So thank you all.